And it looks like we are live. And there's at least a couple of people watching. So I'll let a few people file in. I'm hoping a friend of mine is going to join me here a little bit later. But in the meantime, we can kind of get started on a few things. As is usually the case, fortunately, unfortunately, I am again on travel. So I'm in a hotel room in Texas. Finally going back home tomorrow, which I'm kind of looking forward to. Naturally, since I have a long history of various audio problems, if you are watching this live, please put something in the chat box. Tell me that the sound is coming through okay. And tell me if the video is looking decent or if it is pixelated in any way, shape, or form. I am kind of looking through the options here, making sure that I'm running at a high enough resolution. Okay, Mr. Guntot in Minnesota is here. All right, so we've got a couple of people. I don't know how good the internet connection in this hotel is. Historically, it hasn't been too bad. So, but if you're seeing any deterioration of video or audio quality, please let me know. All right, Mr. Northman is here. Porsche Speedster. All right, we've got a crowd. So let's see. Well, first I'm gonna brag. So some of you may or may not remember, I had my first pronghorn antelope hunt last summer, almost a year ago. It was in August of last year. And this morning I got word from the taxidermist that the mount for my antelope is ready. And I am going to share a picture. It may not be the most massive antelope in the world, but I like it. It's my first, and it is meaningful to me. Where's that file? Once we do that, we'll get moving with rifle scope recommendations, considerations, and stuff like that, which is really the topic of conversation for today. The way I do the whole recommendation business, this is not intended to be a lecture. So if you guys have a question, concern, specific conditions, applications that you'd like me to offer some sort of rifle scope recommendations for, please post it in the chat box, and I'm going to try to address it in the real time, so to speak. Let's see. There it is. So lo and behold, in New Mexico pronghorn. So I'm gonna go pick this thing up, and this is a picture taxidermist sent me. I'm gonna go pick this thing up either over the weekend or early next week. Kind of looking forward to that. Pretty cool. And the antelope was shot from about around 350 yards using 6.5 PRC. 6.5 PRC is an absolute overkill for an animal of this size, but New Mexico being what it is, I didn't know what kind of distance I was going to get, so it was better to be a little bit over-prepared or not. Okay. All right, that's it for the antelope. And Mr. Gunter to Minnesota was pretty cool, man. Would love to have something like that on my wall. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. My wife is not. I don't think she's super excited about that hanging on a wall anywhere in the house. But hey, I'm excited about it. It'll have to do. It'll have to do for the time. Okay. So as you guys know, I have put it in the video description. I maintain a list of recommendations on my legacy website because of the way that website is built. It's a little bit easier for me to have like a kind of a hierarchical menu view. So it's a repository of all the articles, some newer ones from Glassaholic, And that's where I keep up my recommendations, because in that format, it's easy to have them in one place. On my local website, which is more of a blogging format, they kind of, it's very hard to keep some number of posts always accessible. So I maintain my own website just for that. It doesn't cost me too much money. The link to where the recommendations are split up by price here. I just put a link into the chat box. Mr. Sportsman never has a wife said, go ahead and hang carcasses. Yeah, she's not excited, but I'm sure I'll find a way. But where was I? Yeah. So when I just started the whole business recommendations, the market was not nearly as enormous and as diversified as it is now, and also between competing designs, there was generally more diversification. Now, while there are still certain designs that do stand out, lots of them are quite comparable in terms of performance, so you really choose based on the reticles or some other specific features. But in terms of overall quality, a lot of the things that are priced similarly perform similarly. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that happened is that when I do a review of something, when I look at something, I have a tendency to be very thorough. And because of that, everything takes me quite a significant amount of time. And because it takes me quite a significant amount of time, there is no possible way for me to look at everything that's on the market and still have a day job and a life and all that sort of stuff. Right? I can't afford to not have a day job. So by definition, the sheer variety of rifle scopes that I'm able to look at in a given year is not as large as I would like. I could either compromise my standards and be less thorough, which I'm not willing to do, or I could overnight become independently wealthy so I don't have to have a day job, and we all know that's not happening. So we are where we are. What that means is that my various recommendations are not exhaustive. I can only speak with some measure of authority. I don't know if authority is a good word in this case. I can only speak with some measure of confidence about the designs I have spent a sufficiently significant amount of time with, and the designs where I'm able to have reasonable confidence that the scope that I saw is representative of the production models, and where I know with reasonable confidence that overall reliability is on par. Reliability, durability is generally a topic that gets discussed a lot, usually badly. And I will sort of go on the record and say, with some exceptions, for well-made, reasonably high-end rifle scopes, I think it would be very difficult to find any sort of a statistically significant difference in terms of how well they hold up. Some amount of anecdotal evidence out there from the consumer potentially challenges that assertion. But the simple truth is that, a few days ago, somebody on the hide asked, of the scopes sent back to the manufacturer for rifle scope problems, how many of them actually have problems? And with reasonably decent scopes, I guessed maybe 1 out of 10 actually have problems. 9 out of 10, it's not the scope, either the mount or the use himself. And that is generally supported by observations of what service centers see. Somehow rifle scope gets blamed a lot. It doesn't mean there aren't real problems. I've sent back just about everything, and for real problems that I was able to observe and diagnose and quantify. However, by and large, most scopes that are sent back to the manufacturer, there's nothing wrong. That's usually the case. So there's only so much I can get out of anecdotal evidence of durability, and with some brands, I do have an idea of how a particular scope model holds up and what goes wrong with it and what doesn't, and I use that as a factor when I offer recommendations. For example, one of the reasons you generally see a good number of vortex scopes within my recommendations, especially on the higher end of things. I like the Razors and the PST Gen 2s. Is that not only are they good scopes, they generally have usable reticles. I'm not necessarily in love with most of them, but they're usable. But very, very important, the vortex stands behind their product superbly well. Okay. So I hope all of that makes sense. So what I'd like to start with, I run through this mental exercise once in a while, and I like that mental exercise because it gives me certain reasoning to work with. I like to run this mental exercise occasionally where I go, okay, what if I could have only one gun, one scope? One of the things, what would that be? And it grounds me a little bit because, we live in America, we are spoiled by overabundance of just about everything. I can, go and shoot a new gun every day and last for many, many, many days before I have to shoot with another gun. What if I had to use just one gun for everything that I do? So for many years now, if I asked myself that question, that one gun was usually some sort of an accurate AR-15 type, chambered for 6.5 Grendel, because that general configuration did most things that I like doing reasonably well. You could hunt with it, you could shoot fairly far with it, you can do the quick AR stuff with it if you're so inclined, if you keep the weight of the gun moderate. And all of that worked nicely. Well, one of the changes for this year that I have to accommodate, the number of things that I enjoy doing with the firearms has changed because I started shooting matches. And the matches that so far I found myself enjoying the most are the unknown distance matches. I've shot some NRL Hunter ones, and I'm about to go shoot the Burris Optics team challenge. And they introduce a cutoff on how the cartridge that you use has to be above a certain power factor in order to be able to use it in competition, unless you are going in as a skills shooter. So I have to modify my 6.5 Grendel recommendation, and on top of it, as I go along, and I get more and more into hunting as I go along. I'm still not a very experienced hunter, but more experienced than I used to be. So I kind of have to admit to myself that while 6.5 Grendel is very usable for a lot of things that I like doing, yeah, a little bit more pop would not be a bad thing. In the past, one of the things that always prevented me from looking at the quote-unquote large frame AR type semi-automatic guns was that they were just unwieldy, hard to control. You had to hold on to dear life. I just have not had a good experience with them. And within the last few years, that has been sort of changing. The advent of these small large frame ARs, basically a large frame AR-10 type receivers that can accommodate 308 sized cartridges. From Ruger and quite a few others, there is a smaller pattern gun. The guest system seems to have gone through certain evolution, and what kind of sealed the deal for me was the chance to shoot the Q's boombox a good bit at different events. I still don't own one, but I will before too long. And after that, I kind of had to grudgingly admit that the 308 size cartridge in an AR type platform for a well-built gun can do much better than I ever had to admit. A friend of mine who's the quintessential rifle shooter now works for Geissele Precision, and he basically kind of had to admit to me that he, for the first time in his life as a shooter, and he's, national level shooter, the PRS style, at least he used to be, he has to kind of grudgingly admit that modern high-end semi-automatics are really shooting well. They're flexible, they've become a lot more forgiving, and you can do a lot more with them. I'm sure in the grand scheme of things, we're still giving up some accuracy to high-end bolt-action rifles, but not as much as you used to. For the Burris Optics Team Challenge, for example, that is in a couple of weeks, just under 2 weeks. So there's a two-man team. One guy is with a precision rifle and a handgun. A second person is with a semi-automatic rifle and a handgun. So I'm gonna do the bolt gun, and my teammate is he's a CTO from Q, and he's gonna bring, from what I understand, a version of Q's boombox in 6.5 Creedmoor. And given how relatively light that gun is, I suspect he's going to keep the weight of that thing moderate. And some of the prototypes I've seen suggest that it's very doable while retaining pretty good accuracy. In the grand scheme of things, I could take a 16 or 18-inch barreled boombox chambered for 6.5 Creedmoor and do everything I need to do with it. Shoot NRL hunter matches, shoot a PRS match, gas gun match. Regular gas gun matches, hunt with it for most things I would want to hunt in North America. Some a little bit of a stretch, but it's still more pop than a 6.5 Grendel. And I'd be perfectly content, and even if push comes to shove, while it's grossly overpowered for it, when suppressed, I could also clear a building with it and use it for home defense. That can, I think, truly become the one gun I can do for everything that I like doing with a rifle. It's not going to be ideal for most things, right? That's the idea with a one gun. You're not looking for something that's ideal. You know it's going to be compromised, but you are looking for something that's going to give you the least number of compromises. And then, since I am a dark lord of optics, not dark lord of rifles, what rifle scope would you put on it? And since it was ever introduced, my standard choice for the one rifle scope has always been Tangent Data TT315M, which is the 30mm tube model. I have one, I love it, it's a spectacular scope. That has not really changed, but depending on your priorities, the March 1.5 to 15x42 is really giving it a run for its money, especially if we start talking about some potential tactical rather than precision use, where the way the dual focal plane March is set up, you can do pretty much everything with it. It's not as good of a precision scope as a Tangent, a little bit smaller objective, of course, a reticle and stuff like that, shallow depth of field and all that, but it is a better tactical scope, again, because of much more visible reticle, fiber, second focal plane illumination, and stuff like that. So those are my two choices for the one scope. If you are itching to do an experiment when you want to get a rifle scope to do everything with, that's the two that I am converging on. The honorable mention here goes to a scope that's not quite out yet. Schmidt and Bender has a new front focal plane version of their Metascope, 318x42. That should definitely be in this discussion, but until it goes in production and I don't know. I've tested the second focal plane version and liked it quite a lot. But until I test the front focal plane, I can't really add it to my list of recommendations. I'm hoping to get my hands on it toward the end of the summer, and I've got a hunt in Montana for mule deer and cow elk. And the plan is to try to use that scope for that hunt and see if it really works as well as I hope it will. Okay. So for general purpose use, my basic take on things has not really dramatically changed. I want something that tops out at 15 power or a little more, and something that goes down to 3 or a little bit more, or a little bit less, excuse me. And the reason I want that magnification field of view on low end is for use with thermal clip-ons. With most commercially available clip-ons, if you have a decent field of view 3-power scope, you're gonna lose a little bit of a thermal field of view, but not too much, so that will work. So that is the general purpose setup. Okay. Questions, concerns? Is all of this stream of unconsciousness making sense to you guys? Everybody's been kind of quiet listening to my ramblings, so I want to make sure that we're all still here, and if that's all making sense. Let me see if Jeremiah is joining me or not. I don't know. He's not saying. Okay. Hopefully he's going to join a little bit later. If not, then not. I know there's a little bit of a delay between when I ask you a question and when you guys actually hear it, so I'll give it a moment before I move on, and we'll start talking a little bit about what you can get for different amount of money and some specific rifle scope models. If you have a question about a specific price range and performance criteria, again, now is the time to bring it up, put it in the chat box, and I'll address that as I go along. My preference for today is not to dig too much into hunting scopes, unless we're talking about crossover designs, and keep things on the precision and tactical end of things. So I'll talk a little bit about low power variables at some point here, but we'll start with precision scopes, and we'll probably, unless some specific questions come up, my plan is to start on the higher end of things and kind of go down in price a little bit and discuss, what I look for, the things that I require, the things I'm willing to compromise on, and the things I'm not so willing to compromise on. Okay, so okay, well, that's actually very relevant. So, Mr. Porsche Speedster, everything quoted is very expensive. I realize buy once, cry once, but what about other cost ranges? So I'm going to get to other price ranges for a moment. When what I've been discussing so far is my idea of if I could have only one. And if I could have only one, so my basic criteria is that if it's only one very expensive scope, then that's what I'm going to, that's what I'm going to stick with. But there are definitely lower priced options, and I'm going to go over them. The most development we've seen was not in the high-end scopes, although there have been some meaningful improvements. The most developments we've seen has been in the mid-range, and I think in terms of bang for the buck, mid-ranges is where it's at. Okay. Mr. Hudo, interesting name. ZCO versus Tangent 5 to 25 range. What's my choice? My choice is Tangent. So the ZCO is a very nice scope. The reticles are not ideal for me. While it is very, very good optically and mechanically, I think the Tangent is a hair better. Now, in this price range, you're not going to see any sort of a substantial difference in performance, but it is there. And I've had this side by side and with multiple samples. I like the Zico. It's a nice scope. The one part of it where it does have an edge over the Tangent 5 to 25 is in terms of the eye box. I think the Zico is a little bit easier to get behind, although the Tangent is not bad at all. There's a follow-up question. Keep hearing zero stop on the show is really annoying. Could you confirm or deny? I'll be honest with you. I've had more than a couple of ZCOs. I don't remember any issues with the zero stop. Seem to be relatively conventional. So I'm not sure why that would be an issue, but there is nothing simpler than a tangent, completely toolless. You like loosen it knob, reset it, tighten it, no tools, nothing, and it works. And in terms of click quality, there are many very nice scopes out there, and tangent is still kind of in a league of its own. If you have to reset the zero stop frequently, tangent is definitely the easiest, but honestly, for me, that's not really a criteria in terms of how I choose rifle scopes, right? So the only real knock on tangent is that the eye box is on the 5-25 is a meat pack. It's not bad, but it's not incredible either. And the reticles tend to be a little bit on the thin side of things. For now, I don't have any issues with it. I know a few people who, as they got a little bit older, although still younger than me, decided to switch to something with a little bit thicker reticles. And I would have liked the reticle and the tangent to be a little bit thicker. But for the precision shooting world, that would probably make me in the minority. I hear people complain a lot more about reticles being not thin enough for them rather than not thick enough for them. I have a somewhat unpopular view on this. I think we're overdoing it with reticle thinness, and I prefer a little bit more visibility, especially in the center. One of the things I look for in reticles is that I want the primary aiming point to stand out a little bit. If the reticle has a Christmas tree, I want that Christmas tree to be sized so that it's visible from about halfway up the magnification range and up. The lower powers, I really want it to be kind of out of the way a little bit. So I like a relatively thin tree. I don't like solid lines in a tree. And I like a relatively prominent primary aiming point. The way I've been shooting matches this year, like I said, I started shooting matches this year. I've been dialing every elevation and I've been holding for wind. That seems to work for me. But for example, the semi-autos and ARs, I tend to hold everything with a reticle. So I like to have a Christmas tree, but I don't like Christmas tree reticles that are too enormous. I definitely don't like anything as ridiculous as the Horus designs and stuff like that. Okay. Honestly, with this, on the higher end of things, on balance, I think for PRS, practical precision, still plate shooting, I think the engine's still the best. But Zico is up there. The new March is up there. There's a question about colors. I'll talk about that in a moment. It's definitely up there. The new Schmidt 6-36 is just excellent, and it's going to get better next year. So there are many really, really nice scopes, and honestly, if you just choose the reticle that you like, oftentimes that can outweigh most other considerations. I stick with the tangent on the strength of the absolutely spectacular turrets, what I believe to be the best contrast rendering of any rifle scope made to date, very large depth of field and very forgiving parallax. So I primarily, when I'm not testing something, I primarily shoot with tangents. And there is a reason for it, right? Given what I do here, I can shoot with anything I damn well please. And I shoot, if you look at it, so my condition guns, I shoot with fixed rifles. They all have different tangents on them. I have a 7-35 and a 5-25, and I think they're spectacular. If you have a 5-25, I would not sell it to upgrade to the 7-35. But if you're starting from scratch and you're willing to invest the money, 7-35 is a better scope. Not by much again, but it is a better scope. On my rimfire gun, I have a Vortex Razor Gen 3 6-36. And that is meant as a complement. I shoot my rimfire a ton. And the reason I've got the Razor Gen 3 the reason I have a Razor Gen 3 on there is that on 36 power, it has the most forgiving eye box of any scope I've tried to date. And with rimfire, I do shoot on high magnifications than I do, for example, in a Rail Hunter and stuff like that. So to each his own. On my precision air gun, I have a March 5-42, which is also an excellent scope. But again, I tend to run an air gun like the rimfire on higher magnifications, and there are certain advantages to that. Let's see. I see there is a question here on the slightly lower end scopes. Let's kind of finish the discussion on the high end and now start coming down in price. So, Mr. Porsche, please, I see your questions on Discovery, Arkin, etc. So I'll get to that momentarily. Okay, this is a good question, Mr. IMW. Thoughts on the FOV new entrances, colors 5-40 versus March 5-42. So March 5-42 has been around for a while. It's a 5 or 6 degree apparent field of view. I have designed a couple of reticles for March, so I do have two of those scopes. One I set up on my brother's precision rimfire. That one has FMLTR1 reticle I designed, and one I have on my air gun, and I have a very accurate FX air gun, and that one has the FML3 reticle. So, but these are Gen 1 scopes. Now they have Gen 2 with somewhat improved off-axis performance. I think wide field of view does give you an edge. It's not as earth-shattering as people make it to be, but it does give you an edge, right? More field of view is a good thing. One of the things to keep in mind is that with wider field of view designs, it's kind of difficult to keep the edges that clean. With the wider the field of view, the harder it is to maintain a good eye box. So yeah, that's kind of how it works. With colors, so I've looked at it a little bit 3.5-28 to 5-40. I generally don't comment, recommend, or discuss color scopes because of that insanity with the patent that they have. I think the patent that they have and that they used to likely use, obviously I'm not behind the scenes there, likely used to prevent other people from putting out wide field of view scopes. I think that patent is complete nonsense, and the patent examiner who granted them the patent didn't know what he was doing. Leica challenged it in Europe. In Europe, that patent has been invalidated. In the United States, it still stands because they've never gone to court with it, right? So, but it's been used relatively successfully to prevent some of the smaller manufacturers who don't have the funds to go to court. Leica is a good-sized company. For example, Schmidt and Bender 6-36, which is a very nice scope, has a 26-degree apparent field of view in Europe and 21.7 in the United States. That's because of that Swarovski patent. So the way color Swarovski stuff works, they make a nice product, they make a good product, but I have been absolutely boycotting their products because I don't like the business practices. I think using lawfare to intimidate the competition is a perfectly legal way to go, but it's not a business practice that I like or appreciate and want to condone. Now, Carlos and Swarovski could not care less what I think about the subject, justifiably so. It's a big and successful company, and they know what they're doing. But, in my little corner of the internet, I don't have to condone it, so I don't. The patent expires, I think, last I checked, in June of next year, so we will see more large diameter wide field of view eyepieces popping up sometime likely next year. I would not be surprised if there are a couple of manufacturers gearing up for it. And the first one, I'm sure, is going to be Schmidt and Bender, where all of a sudden we're going to get the same version of the 6-36 as they get in Europe. So I'm really looking forward to that because I was quite impressed with that when I saw it briefly. Between 3.5-28 and 5-40, from what I've seen, colors. From what I've seen, I think the 5-40 is a better scope. I have a suspicion that they made the 3.5-28 the way they did, the relatively short and all sort of stuff, because they had some military contracts that they wanted to submit the scope for. And that's a magnification range that generally works quite well for many military requirements, again, because of the potential use with thermal and night vision clip-ons and all that. If you're looking for one of the large diameter eyepiece color scopes for precision shooting use, 5 to 40 I think is a superior design, fewer optical compromises and all that. The field of view is a real thing, and it is quite impressive. I think it's close to 30 degrees of apparent field of view. And with some of the rifle scope designs out there, you can have an interference with the bolt handle. But if you're running a modern chassis type system with high mounts, that should not be an issue. And that's a very, very nice scope. I didn't like too much how they did some of the contrast rendering. In bright light conditions, it seemed like there was some, it's a weird effect, almost looks like blooming. There was some inability to render different colors and shades apart, certain loss of contrast in bright light conditions, which I thought was odd. But I didn't spend a ton of time investigating it. In terms of the pure image quality and optical performance, yeah, Tangent is a better scope. I think this shows probably the 527 is better scope as well. 8 to 40 varies because I've seen a lot of sample variation with 8 to 40, but perhaps they have fixed it by now. But the new large diameter eyepiece color scopes are definitely playing on the high end. And I think they are substantially better scopes than the 5 to 25 and 6 to 24 colors were. Those were not good enough for such an iconic name as colors. The 5 to 40 and 3.5 to 28, I think are good designs. And maybe next year, once that patent expires, I'll reevaluate what happens in the field, and then maybe I will look at them more carefully. Until then, as far as my coverage goes, I'm going to continue anything and everything by colors. Continue to boycott everything, anything and everything by colors and Swarovski again. Not because of anything with the product, but because I don't like the business practice. Okay. Mr. Inigo, emotions aside, I'm not entirely sure which emotions you mean. So you probably want to clarify that. I don't wonder if that example of business practice on Swarovski and colors products. I think I covered what exactly gives me trouble there. Mr. JR period, not exactly on topic. Do you have any experience with Steiner H6XI, Leupold 4HD, and XA 2.5 to 20, or the upcoming PLHC 2.5 to 20? I do. Let me get to that momentarily once I'm done with the high end. Just give me a sec. Mr. Inigo goes, no, H6XI is not a good hunting scope, but good for precision after 6X. I assume you mean the 2 to 12. I have that one, actually like that scope. And with illumination, it works just fine across the range. Mr. Inigo goes, much lacks resolution in a 10x Rapture. That's kind of an interesting statement. So in terms of pure resolution, it's not as good as March scopes with the larger objective. I assume you're talking about 1.5 to 15 by 42. It's not as good as the ones with 6x or 7x Raptor ratio or 8x, whatever, and a larger objective. But it's still quite good, right? So whenever you go for such a high Raptor ratio, there will always be compromises. And the big question is that how big of a compromise is it? So I have a March 1.5 to 15 by 42, a dual focal plane design. And optical performance is very good, but not as good as the larger March scopes. It's still very much an alpha scope. And the other compromise you get for the large Raptor ratio is that the apparent field of view is a fairly moderate, it's around 20 degrees, if memory serves me right. But for that, you get a very wide magnification ratio. And if, for example, you were looking for one rifle scope to do as many different things as possible and relatively well, Then the March is almost in a league of its own. I think it's almost the only scope in the market right now that I can shoot an RL Hunter match with and clear house with and put it behind a thermal clip on a hunting gun. And it's compact enough and light enough to do all of that and has enough magnification range to do all of that. Right? So there is a trade-off there. Yeah, it's not as well optimized optically, but for a 10x erector, it's as well optimized as I've ever seen, and still, quite good. Okay. Okay, so we're getting more and more questions for the higher end of things. So let's for the mid range. So let's start getting that way. So what I've been discussing so far has been the very high end stuff, and it generally is good. If I were to make a sort of a hierarchy in terms of overall performance, I think Tangent overall still has a little bit of an edge. Just below that, we have the ZCO, the new March, and the new Schmidt 6-36, which I think is absolutely exceptional. And once the wide field of view models get here, I think the Schmidt will probably take an edge over the ZCO and March. That's my best guess, but I'd like to see that scope first. Given that this Swarovski patent is expiring in June of next year, it'll be very interesting to see which manufacturers introduce larger eyepiece, wider angle models, and that may force me to reshuffle some of this stuff. That's about a year from now. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this now, so I want to kind of seal in my mind what the state of the art is today, and then as we start getting out there with new designs, we'll see how all of that boils down. Now, as you get down to still expensive but slightly less stratospheric rifle scope designs, you get to about a 3K range. And in that $2,600 to $3,000 range, you have the better 6-36 Japanese rifle scopes like the Vortex Razor Gen 3, Element Theos, Zeiss S3, Leupold Mark 5 with illuminator reticle kind of sticks in there, but I think that's competition is a little bit too strong for that. Let's see what else is there. I'm sure it will come back to me. I think somebody just asked about the Saturn S8 5-40. They're also trying to sell that one for 3K, around 3K as well. I know if you go on the sniper side, you will find a horde of people who claim they're finding, Razor Gen 3s for $2,200 all the time and all that sort of stuff. I don't know where they're finding it. All I can go with is talk about rifle scope in terms of what their map pricing is and use that. I think half of the height still lives in a make-believe world of Liberty Optics prices from 4 years ago. Or they're talking about military discounts, something like that. I can't base my pricing categories based on that. These higher-end Japanese scopes are very, very close to the alpha stuff, and in terms of bang for the buck, they definitely offer more, right? On balance, my favorite is probably the Razor Gen 3. It is an alpha class scope, but for $3,000. It's not as good optically as the really fancy stuff, but it's up there, it's close. It's very good mechanically. The turrets have decent feel. Well, the Vortex had to change them. Although mine is a pretty early one, and I like the feel. And the really standout thing is just how easy the damn thing is to use because of the most incredibly forgiving eye box of any scope on the market today, any precision scope on the market today, I think. The way this business with the 6-36 LOW scopes is working out is, I think on balance, Vortex has a slight edge and has a unique eyepiece. Element Theos has the best turrets of that bunch, completely unique turrets specific to Element, and it's a little bit lighter, very good optical performance. And the Zeiss S3 is a little bit less expensive of this whole trade there. Right? So yeah, kind of pick your poison, see what works the best or the least for you. Nightforce Attacker 7-35 is sort of in the same conversation as well. The basic problem is that I think the map price on it is in the $3,600–3,700 range. And the basic problem for the Attacker, the 7-35, which is an excellent scope, is that it's not better than the Gen 3 or Element Theos. So it may very well be a related design, from how light optics works. So the basic problem for the Attacker, as nice of a scope as it is that it just costs more money. So it's hard for me to recommend it. But again, it's one of those situations. If you have an Attacker 7-35, would I sell it to get an Element or a Gen 3? Probably not. If you like the reticle, it works for you. There are very few reasons to trade it, and you'll lose money on selling. But if you're buying a new one, I'd be gravitating toward the newer 6-36 designs. I think they offer more for the money, and they don't tunnel on low power, while the Attacker, which has been out longer, does tunnel on low power for a little bit. And when I say things like this, people start throwing the perceived extra spectacular, amazing, never seen before. I'm trying to sound like Trump unsuccessfully. Never seen before, best ever durability of the Nightforce scopes. I'm just gonna go bullshit on it. Every rifle scope has a service department, and they're all relatively busy. Again, with well-made rifle scopes out there today, I'm not seeing a durability difference. I think Nightforce marketing is very good in talking about durability, but I don't think you'll find any statistical difference between these scopes that I have just mentioned. Okay. A little bit of a dark horse there is the Steiner T6XI 5-30 by 56. It's an interesting design. It's also in the high twos, I think not quite at $3,000, but close, like 2,800, stuff like that. So similar price to Element Theos. It's very good optically. It does fill the view very well. In terms of resolution, I think it's up there with the rest of these. In terms of contrast, I think it's very slightly behind. In many ways, the optical system of a T6XI 5-30 to me looks pretty close, at least clearly related to the Burris XTR Pro 5.5-30 by 56. That is, $800 less. What T6XI has is more sophisticated turrets. They lock, they have different indicators, and but the two scopes are built side by side, so it is sometimes difficult for me to recommend the T6XI because I also like the turrets on the XTR Pro. On the other hand, I commonly see deals on T6XI, and it is a nice turret and it is a nice scope. So at the regular full price, I think I'd take the Razor Gen 3 over it. I think a couple of months ago, I don't know if they still are, Steiner was running a massive discount, and T6XI could be had for $700 less. And for that price difference, I think it's definitely worth it. So it's one of those things you have to go and look for deals. And again, I know I'm repeating myself. You really have to look at reticles. For example, I like the MSR2. If you like true reticles, Burris SCR2 is not bad, although again, it's a little bit, excuse me, it's a little bit thinner than I like, and the tree is a little bit bigger than I like. But the way they do illumination, without illuminating the whole tree, which is kind of like T-shaped, I really like that. I think it's a very good general purpose way to illuminate a reticle. For example, as much as I like the Element Theos overall, one of the things that prevents me from doing much more with it is that they illuminate the whole reticle, the tree and everything. And I just don't like that, right? So I've tested that scope when it first came out. I was quite impressed with it. I think they did an excellent job with it, and the turrets are spectacular. But for my personal use, the way they illuminate it just doesn't work for me. I spend a good amount of time in low light and illuminating the entire reticle like that just doesn't do it for me. So that's that. And before I move on a little further down into the price range, so there's the a Citron S8 that was, I think, mentioned a moment ago, the 5 to 40 by 56 with 40mm tube. I've looked at it. I thought that optically it was very good in terms of center field resolution. It's may very well be class leading for this range. Across the whole field and contrast rendering, not quite as good as, let's say, Gen 3, but definitely up there. The basic problem for Citron is that they have an annoying tendency of screwing up the reticles. I think the tree reticle they use pretty much takes it out of contention. And the non-tree reticle is okay, but kind of nothing special. And then the early samples that I saw, the turrets had a little bit more slop than I would expect to see in this price range. So for 3K, I think it was a little bit rough around the edges. Now, Falcon, an optics company out of UK, is probably bringing out a version of that same core design, same OEM, but with their own reticle that I had some tertiary involvement with and with tightened up turrets. And the gentleman who owns Accuracy International, I think, has that scope, the first kind of pre-production prototype, on his 50 cal that he's planning to shoot in the World Championships in Raton, New Mexico, around 4th of July, thereabouts. Unfortunately, I can't go. I have to be elsewhere. I have to be elsewhere that weekend. But that looks very promising to me, and it is a better reticle. So once that scope gets into production, I'm going to get my hands on it, and I think that's going to be the right time to revisit this 5 to 40 design from Kenko. Citron is Kenko's house brand. And traditionally, they do pretty well with the core design, but tend to mess up with some of the details. I'm hoping that the Falcon version of it is going to do better. Okay. So Mr. Mega Gooch, still don't know how to pronounce that. Have you spoken anything about Burris scopes? Not yet. We're actually just about getting to that price range, and I see there is a follow-up question here on the XTR 3i. Where is it? XTR Pro and XTR PS, and maybe this is a good time to touch on that. In terms of bang for the buck for a precision rifle scope, it's very hard to overlook in the 2000-ish range. I think I think it's probably the best bang for the buck around $2,000 range, I think. The XTR 3i is made in the Philippines. The XTR Pro is made in the US next to Steiner T6XI, etc. These are all related optical systems from a design standpoint. And XTR PS is also made in the Philippines. It's basically an XTR 3i together with this heads-up display inside the scope and the clickless 20mm elevation turret with the digitizer. And I've been testing a couple of XTR PS scopes, and I have been extremely impressed. Optical XTR Pro is better, but I think introduction of this HUD and the ballistic data in the rifle scope, not the calculator ballistic data, it's a lookup table. I think that makes a difference. If I was spending my own money in the $2,000 range, would I buy the XTR Pro, XTR PS? Pro is better optically, PS is good enough, and I think the heads-up display introduces some advantages. Which one would I get? Have both. I should do video on the two of them. I'm kind of leaning toward the PS because I think this type of electro-optic integration is the way of the future. I think that's where things are going. When I get back home, I plan to do a full review of XTRPS. I've done a couple of videos on it, on the heads-up display and the features and all that. I think at this point I can do a wrap-up, and I'm very impressed with what it offers. Now, that's some weight and that's some price, right? So if all you're looking for is optical and mechanical performance, you can get the same with the XTR3i um, without the electronics. But I think the way they integrate electronics is a meaningful step forward in terms of the overall performance envelope. Not just optics, not just mechanics, but also data in front of your eyes, ability to see what the controls are doing in low light. Remember, right? So if it's so low, if the light's getting low and you can't quite figure out what the hell happened you did with the turret, you can't see it inside the scope and the display. If you're getting older and you can't see the turrets next to you without reading glasses, again, because you can see what's in the heads-up display inside the scope, that's not really an issue for you. I think it's a meaningful improvement. I would have really loved it for Burris Steiner to make a weapons-mounted laser rangefinder that talks wirelessly to XTRPS and displays the measured distance in a HUD. That would be just awesome. But even as the scope is configured right now, I think it is a meaningful, absolutely meaningful step forward. Okay. So I hope that all makes sense. I'm gonna do a review on XTRPS, and I have 3i and Pro as well. So I'll talk a little bit about how they compare and stuff like this. The one thing I wish they did with the PS. Right now, it's only available, I think, the best I can tell, with the SCR2 mil reticle, which I really like. But the scope of the heads-up display like this is really intended for dialing elevation and holding for wind. So it would be nice if they offered a simpler reticle that doesn't have a tree or has much more abbreviated tree. I think for the way the scope is intended to be used, that would work a little bit better. So if I were Burris, I'd introduce a second option so that you can have a tree reticle and a non-tree reticle for an XTRPS model. Let's see. So Mr. Sportsman goes, we gotta just look at the Citroen S8. Yes, so we've talked about that. The question about T6XI, I think we just talked about that. Oh, that's very interesting. So Mr. Harry Grubbs goes, I saw the Steiner on sale today for $15.99 scope. So yeah, if you saw a T6XI for that amount of money, you should get one. Genuinely, the way the T6X, oh, I assume he's talking about T6XI. Let me see if I can fix this chair so it doesn't lean. No, there we go. That's better. T6XI, I've been only talking about the 5 to 30 because we're sort of talking about the precision rifle scopes here. I generally like the T6XI lineup. I think the 2.5 to 15 is a very nice scope. The design I arguably like the most out of the T6XI lineup is probably the 3 to 18 by 56. It's a little bit of an unusual design. Most of these intermediate power rifle scopes don't come with 56mm objectives. I think it's not a bad configuration. For example, for Neural Hunter and Kara, stuff like that, I don't shoot on very high power. I know many people shoot on higher magnification than I do, but I don't, right? And for me, that would be actually very, very interesting, kind of across the board design that you can hunt with and do precision with, and because it goes down to 3 power on the low end, and this whole Burris Steiner line actually has pretty nice apparent field of view, right around 24 degrees. Interestingly, so all of those scopes technically violate that Swarovski-Callas patent, but I don't see Swarovski going after Burris Steiner very much. They're owned by Beretta. They are a big company. They will go to court, and I don't think Swarovski is itching to pick a legal fight that's going to be very expensive. and that they are likely to lose since they lost the same fight in Europe, right? So I think my best guess is that they probably will have a hard time bullying Beretta. But anyhow, that having been said, with the T6Xi, I kind of like the 3218 model the most, arguably, partly because it is a unique configuration, and partly because it is an ESCO. The H6Xi, in terms of the optical design, I actually related, but they're a little bit lighter and they have 30mm tubes and they cost a little bit less. They have a little bit less of adjustment range. The 3218x50 is very good. I really like the 2212. I know there's been some controversy about it, but that's, a bit under 2K and we're just getting to the price range. So I'll come back to that. Mr. Alpine, did you already mention the Zeiss S5? It's overpriced at retail, but optically for me it splits the difference between the DCO 527 and Schmidt 6236. I actually did not mention Zeiss S5, and that was an oversight because I like the S5. But the S5 that I tested was a 3218, which was very, very good. But for that configuration, those turrets and turret boxes are just enormous, and it made it a little bit compromised from a practical standpoint. The 5-25 scope is very good, but the basic, as you correctly pointed out, the basic problem for Zeiss is that yes, it is very good, but field of view is not very wide. Zeiss does not seem to be pushing it very much since the S3, less expensive S3 came out. Zeiss has been focusing a lot more on that, and S3 is made in Japan. S5 is allegedly made in Germany. I have no proof of where it's made, but it is very nice. Reticle illumination is done very well. It does belong in the alpha group. The basic problem with the S5 is that when I look at it, I don't know why I would pick it over the Schmidt or ZCO, unless the reticle really agrees with the right. So if that's the reticle you want, and I like the Emil reticle. A lot of people say it's a little bit too thick for them. I actually like that reticle. Unless that's the reticle you're going for, it's very hard to reason why you would pick, let's say, S5 over ZCO or the 6236 Schmidt. And again, in this whole high-end world, it will be very interesting to see what happens next year, because since Schmidt does have a wider field of view model in Europe, they'll be able to start shipping to US immediately. And I think, unless Zico and Zeiss and others do the same thing, I think just on the merits, it will allow Schmidt to pull away a little bit from Zico and Zeiss on the higher end of things. With Tinge, it's going to be interesting. I don't know if they'll introduce a wide field of view model or not. I don't have that kind of insight. But in terms of pure color and contrast management, Tinge still does have an edge, right? So when we're talking about wider field of view models like the European Schmidt or the colors for that matter, it becomes kind of an interesting argument. What is more important to you? And I can argue it both ways. But for broadly comparable scopes like the Zeiss S5, for example, a wider field of view Schmidt, I think will be a better choice. And while Schmidt's grid reticle may have been a little bit controversial, the new TR2ID reticle, the tree reticle, is actually very nicely done and a lot less controversial. And I think Schmidt with that would do very, very nicely. So, Mr. Inigo. Thoughts on Meopta 5 and 6 and future products? So the Optica 5 and Optica 6 are now discontinued. The Meoptis, that was purchased. The bigger company was purchased by Carlyle. So the Meopta is kind of reinventing itself. They had a lot of new stuff at the SHOT Show. I haven't heard anything else from them, and I've been busy, so I didn't really ask. It is on my list to keep an eye on. Meopta is capable of making some very, very nice stuff. I think they're giving up an Optica name. It's all going to be Neo or something again, Neo Sport, Neo this, Neo that. They were going to revamp their website for the sport optics. Actually, since this came up, I'm curious. The basic problem, they no longer have ES Service Center, so they'll kind of have to redo a little bit of how they do things. They claim to have an eShop that says opening soon. So honestly, as far as I'm concerned, Meopta right now, for me, is kind of in a holding pattern. I don't know what's going to happen with the company. They had a guy in charge who was new, to me at least, as a former Czech military officer. Whenever you get a career military guy, go and try to run a primarily civilian optics company, there is always a learning curve there. Seems like a smart guy. I'm sure that has every chance of doing well. But how it's really going to pan out, I have no clue. So I'm not going to spend a ton more time on Meopta because I just don't know what the product line is going to look like a year from now. So I'm going to just wait and see. Mr. Harry Grubbs. I have one that's great. I assume you're talking about the Steiner T6, T6XF 3-18 by 56. Since I think you posted that when I was talking about that scope, at least that's my best guess. So before we go down to a 2000-ish price range, trying to see what I am forgetting that was between $2,000 and $3,000 that is worth mentioning. Mega Gooch, have you seen Minox LR 5-25? Not in any length of time. Have you heard much about Minox these days? Not a ton. Minox essentially gave up on the US market. There is barely any customer support these days. They've kind of fully pulled back into Europe to show up a little bit in Europe, but also not as much. So I've pretty much given up on Minox. They made many nice scopes and they're capable of making nice scopes. But it's like with Meopta, I don't know what the company is doing, so I'm very reticent about making any real conclusions out of what they got. So between $2,000 and $3,000 price range, and I'm talking about normal street prices, not the amazing sales and anything like that. In a normal price range, the $2,000 to $3,000 price range, the scopes I have not touched on are Leupold Mark 5 HD and US Optics FDM foundation scopes. I actually haven't heard much of anything from US Optics lately. I need to reach out to them and see what's happening. I like the FDM scopes. They've revamped the mechanical, but optically these are old designs. They're very long. They perform well. They do have a lot of tunneling on the low end. On the higher end, it's decent eye box and nice wide field of view. I like this turret they redesigned about 3-4 years ago. They're decent scopes, and if you have one, it works for you. It's great. A JVCR reticle is very good. It's just if you are starting out spending your own money, unless you're getting a really good deal, given how strong these Japanese 6-36 scopes are, it's just very difficult to recommend a 5-25 or whatever that range is FDN scopes. It's a nice scope. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's kind of an old, very long optical system. And the newer competition is just very good. It's a very competitive market. Again, if you have an FDN scope and it works for you, tunneling doesn't bother you. I would not, sell one to switch to something unless there's a specific thing you're looking for. But if I am spending my own money and buying a new scope right now at normal retail prices, it's very hard for me to really say yes, go buy US Optics FDN scopes. Again, it's a nice scope, it will work, but there are limitations just due to the aging optical system that you don't have quite the same limitations with these new 6-36 Japanese scopes, the Element Theos, Vortex Razor Gen 3, Zeiss S3, with the Burris, XTR Pro, Steiner T6XI, etc. With Leupold, it's kind of interesting. They have a good following. Mark 5 HD has 7 to 35, 5 to 25, 3.6 to 18 scope, and now there's a 2 to 10. I have not, only one of those I have not tested is a 2 to 10, and now they have a new reticle. I'd like to. That's actually an interesting point. And send them an email, because the 2 to 10 is actually might be something fairly special for certain niches. The 3.6 to 18 was made very short, which introduces certain complexities. So you're giving up some performance to make the scope very short. Yeah, there's a little bit more sample variation because of that. Unless you need very short overall length, that's not a scope I commonly recommend. However, if you do need short overall length, it's just definitely worth considering. But again, now there is competition there from the March 1.5 to 15 by 42, Delta Striker 3.5 to 21 by 44, which is like half an inch longer. It's actually a better scope than Mark 5. The March 1.5 to 15 is a better and shorter scope than the Mark 5. So there is pretty strong competition there. The 7 to 35 Mark 5 is not great. It's not bad, but it's not great. Kind of the cherry of the line is a 5 to 25, which is a nice scope. Somehow, with that optical system, the Mark 5 design kind of all came together. It's a nice scope, and it is, I think, the lightest rifle scope of this configuration out there. The basic problem for Leupold is that the illuminated version is like $500 more than non-illuminated, and what was arguably their best general purpose reticle, the PR2 mil, is not available with illumination. I've seen some prototypes, but for production, still not out there. So at full price for an illuminated Mark 5, I think it's overpriced. But for the non-illuminated, that gets a little bit better. But then again, with front focal plate scopes, I run on low magnification a lot. I like to have illumination. So for me, that becomes a little bit kind of a quandary. Which one do I like more? Which one do I like less? However, for example, if you are trying to do an RL100, you need to make weight, and you want that magnification range, the Mark V easily becomes one of the better models. And for that competition, maybe illumination doesn't bother, lack of illumination doesn't bother you that much, and then Mark V all of a sudden becomes a very, very interesting option. It is quite good optic. I don't think it's as good as all these new Japanese 6 to 36 scopes, but it's quite nice, especially in the 5 to 25 version. Field of view is kind of a meat pack, narrowish side, but optical quality is quite good. The PR2, PR3 reticles are quite nice. PR3 is a non-tree reticle. PR2 has a small tree designed, I think, by John Pinch. Pretty nice turrets. I think it's a nice scope, but the reason to get the Mark V is if you are trying to make weight with a scope. And also, if you have a military law enforcement discount with Leupold, you can actually do quite nice. All of a sudden, it becomes a much stronger proposition in terms of a bang for the buck. So that's the Mark V. So am I forgetting anything else in the $2,000 to $3,000 range, or did I? Miss anything? Let's have talked about Vortex, Element, Zeiss S3, Leupold, US Optics. We talked about Steiner. All right, if I forget anything, please remind me, and I will get back to it. Oh, here's an interesting Mega from Mr. Sundin 564. Mega Gocha. I have a Minox ZP5 525. It is great, but warranty is 10 years, non-transferable. Yeah, like that's not a super, So 10 years itself, I can make an argument. I don't usually care about 10 years versus lifetime, especially given the way I go through scopes. So, but so although that does have certain value, but the non-transferable part in the modern marketplace is just silly. Yeah. So yeah, take it for what it is. Technically, March also has a 10-year warranty, although it's definitely transferable, but also for March, because it's a really pretty small boutique company, there are some Japanese laws that are basically saying they cannot officially offer a warranty longer than that. So they can't put it on paper, but I've got it on good authority. If you have a March that's older than 10 years old and something breaks with it, they will freaking fix it. So March really stands behind their products very well. Service does take a little longer. You do have to, the scope does end up having to go to Japan. You send it to somebody in US and they send it to Japan. So service can take a little bit longer, but they absolutely support everything and they really don't break all that much. All the high-end scopes don't break that much unless you do something truly awful to them, which I frequently do, which I've broken just about all of them at some point or another. So let's see. So as we get into the under 2K range, on the precision side of things, you have the previous generation Japanese scopes, and that's things like Traktoric 4.5 to 30 by 56, Delta Striker 4.5 to 30 by 56, a little bit under the price wise, but the related design is a Athlon Kronos. You have the Philippine-made Burris XTR3i, the non-PS version, the traditional optomechanical version that is also quite competent. I think Vortex might still be making Razor Gen 2 4.5 to 27 by 56. Definitely an aging design, but if you want something truly proven, I don't think there's a precision scope out there more proven than that one. What else is there? Yeah, so those are probably the biggest hitters, arguably. And again, so with these previous Light Optics Works design, the 4.5 to 30 by 56, sometimes 5 to 30 by 56. It's not as nice as a newer, more expensive 6 to 36, but it's still very nice, significantly less expensive. Very, very proven, very, very good for the money. I can make a very solid argument that something like the Traktoric, I happen to like Trak, they go direct to consumer and they support their product very, very well. Or the Delta Striker, it's not a Polish company I know very well. Japanese made striker scopes are made in Japan. You're for 16-ish, 1600-ish bucks, somewhere around there, you're really getting a lot for your money. So if you can't cough up 2,500 bucks or a little more for the 6 to 36, going into the 1600-ish dollar range for something like Delta Striker or Traktoric or something along those lines is not a bad way to go. You are still kind of staying out of the whole Chinese manufacturing world. With Chinese made scopes right now, with all the tariffs going up and down and etc., it's kind of a pain in the ass. Anyway, they're still dealing with Japanese scopes. They're still dealing with very well made scopes. They are still very full featured. These are front focal plane designs with good quality turrets, mostly 10 mils per turn. Illumination, yada, 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 right? So this would have been absolute state of the art, 15, 20 years ago. And they're very, very competent now. And, you don't quite have to sell your kidney to get one of those. If I was spending my own money, for a lot of scopes that I use, I would have been staying in that general price range and that general quality level. And honestly, I do, right? In terms of pure optical performance, I can make a solid argument that this $1,500 to $1,000 range is where you get the most for your money. Burris XTR Pro is generally a little bit more, that's 2000-ish, 2200-ish, but I keep on seeing them very consistently, especially the previous SKU in the $1,600 range. And the XTR Pro is a more modern design and does have wider field of view with very good image quality. So if you're spending $1,600 and you can find an XTR Pro, something like that, that's probably the most for your money. And now I'm curious. So Euro Optic had that. Let me see if they still have it. I thought it was a discontinued SKU that allowed them to keep it at that low of a price. But I don't know. Let me look. Now I'm very curious. Yeah, I don't see it anymore. Might still be around in some places. Hold on a second. I'm gonna do a quick look. If it's still there, I'll put up a link. Euro made their new website. It's driving me absolutely bananas. What the hell am I supposed to do on that? Okay, let's whittle it down a little bit. Just looking at this, there's so many scopes. So another scope in there in the general range, same basic design is 3G 10 mile, 4.5 to 30 by 56. Very decent scope. Not my favorite reticle, but it's not bad. It's about 1900-ish bucks. And head to head, I think the Burris is XTR Pro is a better scope. Oh, that's interesting. Let me see. So for the Steiner T6XI, it looks like they're still running for a discount. So you can buy Steiner T6XI on Euro Optic right now, 5 to 30 by 56 SCR2 reticle for under $2,000. Maybe you can do better on scope list. I don't know if you can still have that, but that is a very good price. I'll put a link in the. I'll put a link into the chat box. Moment. The fuck? This is annoying. My link generator. I have this link shortener that's not working and driving me bananas. So if you're shopping in $2,000 range, you have a lot of really good options these days. There we go. I think it's going to be here. How come my link shortener is not working? Is it because now is the time when I need it? Is that why it's not working? That would absolutely not surprise me. That's the way computers work. They, promise you performance and freedom and all that sort of stuff, and then when you actually need it, well, how interesting. It's just the Euro optic stuff that's not working very well. Okay, let's utilize a different approach. There we go. So here's a link, for example. Yeah, so XTR Pro you can pick up for 1,600 bucks. Link I just put in for the Steiner T6XI is under $2,000 and it has a better turret. So there are deals to be had there. And XTR Pro for 1,600 I think is the best deal you are going to have right now on a precision scope. Very interesting. When I do a search for XTR Pro, that scope that doesn't actually show up, which I find very interesting. Go figure it. I'm not gonna start looking for links. And it doesn't Cytron have a big 40mm major precision scope, 5 to 40 56 or so? Yes, it does. I've covered it earlier. It has very good center field resolution. The version that I've seen, the turrets got a little bit more slop on them than I want to see in this price range. And the reticle was completely Cytroned, which I don't appreciate. But Falcon is going to be bringing out a version of that scope probably later this year. Maybe early next year, but hopefully later this year with a better reticle and tightened up turrets. And I plan to take a look at it. At that point, it looks quite promising. So. Do something. There we go. So there's that that Burris XTR Pro for 1,600 bucks. I'm gonna post link to that one, because while that price is available for that money, it's very hard for me to recommend anything else in terms of a bang for the buck. Here is the link that Mr. Harry Grubbs has mentioned. There we go. That having been said, at regular prices, it's very hard to go against tracked. And with all of this, since a lot of the performance is relatively similar, I think Burris XTR Pro has a little bit of an edge because of the newer wide angle eyepiece. But for the rest of them, just go look at the reticle that works for you. And all of these Delta Striker, tracked Toric UHD, 3G 10 mile, Athlon Chronos. There's a very, very closely related designs. There are some differences here and there, but by and large, Pico Reticle works best for you. Go with that. I think that's just going to work just fine for your purposes. As we go, we're at about hour and a half. All right, so I'll have to get a little bit less verbose at this point. As we go just a little bit further down the price range, we get to a few Philippine-made scopes, like the Burris XTR3i, which are quite nice. And then we'll start getting in with higher-end Chinese scopes. Anyway, general thoughts on clarity and resolution of S3. We're talking about Citron S3. 624 PLR with updated turrets. So I have not tested that version. I've seen it. It looked very nice optically. It's an oldish design that they did a very good job with, and with the 4x reactor and all that, it's relatively easy to optimize. The basic problem with it is, I recall, let me pull up, make sure that I didn't screw it up. Yeah, it gets in the same $1,600-ish range. It is a nice scope. The reticle is still, fully citroned out. That reticle is just a monumental screw up with how they did it. Definitely the mill. Let me look at the MOA reticle. Yeah, both mill and MOA reticles are just a monumental screw up. I remember the turrets were better. I remember it was a nice scope optically. The basic problem is that when Citron first came up with that 6-24 design, it really stood out above the competition in terms of optical performance. It no longer does. It's not worse than the competition, but it's not better, except the competition gets you the same basic performance with better reticles, with a broader magnification range, newer designs, right? So Citron is not a bad scope at all. But again, if I look at it and I think, okay, under what circumstances would I, let's say, recommend the Citron S3 PLR over the tracked or Burris XTR Pro, something like that, and I don't really know how to answer that question. Even if you overlook the really silly reticles, the big thing that scope has going forward is it's very light. I think it's under 30 ounces with a 50mm objective. Other than that, I don't know. And that reticle is just no picnic. So I don't know what to tell you. What is it called? I'm looking up the name of the reticle. So MH5IR. It's just a unmitigated. That reticle is just an unmitigated mess, in my opinion. Now I may be unnecessarily picky. It's entirely possible. Go look and see if it works for you. But yeah, in terms of the optomechanical fundamentals, it's a very nice scope. It's been around for a long time. But yeah, and again, it's under 30 ounces. But the reticle really screws it up for me. It's a very easy design to get lost in. All right. let's see, where were we? So before we move a little bit further down in terms of price, I kind of want to talk a little bit about other configurations. I've been mostly focusing here on the precision stuff, so leaning a little bit more heavily on the highest power models. And while we're in the $1,600 range, so one of the applications that I really like is something that will go on an accurate semi-auto, and oftentimes for that I want a somewhat smaller scope, and again something that might work with the clip-on reasonably well, etc. Yeah, there are several scopes there with 44, 50 millimeter objectives that are quite nice and that are worth a mention. In the $1,600 range, one of my favorites is slowly becoming Delta Striker, 3.5 to 21 by 44. In many ways, it's kind of what the Mark V should have been. Couple of decent reticles. They do reticles a little bit different. They work for me. Excuse me, but it's definitely something you want to look at carefully. But in terms of the way the scopes are well packaged, it's very nice. Yeah, eyebox gets a little bit tighter at high magnification. But if I was going to be looking for a precision gas gun scope or something for a compact, shorter barrel, 16-inch barrel, lightweight, bolt, accurate bolt gun, something like this would pretty much be somewhere near the top of my list. Couple of other things out there in the scopes I didn't talk about too much is this new Canadian company called Telson. I helped them a little bit with the reticles, and I've been testing the Telson 3 to 18 by 50, and yeah, I think it's going to be ending up in my list of recommendations. It's Japanese scopes, very, very well balanced design. Again, very nice for an accurate semi-auto or a shortish, lightish rate. Bolt gun, I have it on a 16-inch barrel, 6-arc bolt gun at the moment. It works very well. Steiner has the HXXI 3 to 18 by 50 there. With Telson, like I said, I just want to. They just came out this year. They look to be very good. I have not heard of any real complaints yet. There's just not that many scopes are out there, so I'm being a little bit cautious, and I want to look at a couple more before I really am comfortable recommending them. But it's looking very promising. I like what I'm seeing. I think these are going to be very competent options. In the $2,000 range, they have the 5 to 32 by 56 that I've seen prototypes, but I haven't tested the production version yet. I hope to do so in the not too distant future. And I have the 3 to 18 by 50, and I like it quite a lot. I used a couple of comparisons, so I think it does very well against the field, and again in the $1,500-$1,600 range. A little bit of a dark horse here is these new designs from IX. It's Leapers Integrix. They are designed and made for now in Taiwan, but they're going to be moved manufactured to the US. I had the 3 to 18 by 44. Those have a 4.5 to 27 by 56 and 6 to 36 that I'll be testing. On the 3 to 18, so the scope I did up with was kind of a very late model engineering prototype that had issues with the turrets were not machined correctly, the steps were not quite right, and all that. They caught all of that. They've changed. They're going to be changing it all for production models, and I can't base my recommendations on that scope until I see something production. But I will say this: the overall optical system optimization, image quality across the board, center and edges, and all that was really excellent. Probably the best I've seen overall for this money. Very close to it. So Telson is a little bit better in some ways, a little worse in others. But it was very impressive what they did. Again, can't recommend it yet, not until I see production models, but that might disrupt a little bit some of the pecking order later in the year when we see full production scopes. Maybe remains to be seen. Mr. Inigo, as a reticle designer, what is your biggest challenge? Oh gosh. There are so many. Honestly, the biggest challenge when you're designing reticles is to not add stuff that you don't need. Usually, as you go through it's an iterative process. As you go through these iterations of different reticle shapes and stuff like that, in later stages of that, you're not adding features, you're usually removing them, right? If you're sitting there looking at a particular feature and you are debating whether you really need it or not, chances are you don't need it, right? So that's the most likely. That's the most likely possibility. That's probably the biggest challenge. With and beyond that, it just comes down to application. With front focal plane designs, it's just very hard to balance a good performance on high magnification with a good performance on low power. There are ways to work around that. Other than not adding too many features, I will say that the biggest challenge, arguably, is market inertia. Rifle scope companies, most of them by the marketing people are by definition risk averse. They have a very strong tendency to do me too reticle designs because they know that something can exist in the market, kind of sells. They want to do something like that, just make it look a little different. I think there are some underserved niches and applications that could be done with somewhat more unusual reticle designs. But it's very hard to convince anybody to actually put that in a rifle scope. Eventually I'll succeed. I have some ideas. But like I said, the biggest thing is finding a balance where you don't make the reticle too busy. Yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge. Okay. All right, we're beginning to run out of time, and I'm fading a little bit. I didn't get too much sleep the last couple of days. So I've talked a little bit about kind of these mid-range crossover scopes, the $1,500 range. Before I move on down, I want to mention the Vortex Razor HDLHT 4.5 to 22 by 50. I still have my original one. I've seen quite a few since then. They've proven to be holding up pretty nice. There's quite a lot of them out there. And in terms of performance in the front focal plane scope, for the weight, I think that's still ahead of the curve. There still isn't anything as light as the HDLHT. I think it clocks in at 21.7 ounces. And normally it's right around $1,500, so that's in the same general price range that we've been talking about, with a 50mm objective for a kind of a long-range hunting mountain rifle. It's very hard to overlook it. I think it's a very, very nice design. To keep the weight as low as it is, they had to make some compromises. For example, the elevation turn being 6 milliradian per turn. It doesn't have the best feel, but the clicks are so widely spaced that it feels actually perfectly reasonable. It's still muted and quiet, but it's a decent feel. So yeah, so if you want the lightest weight of the 50mm objective, the Razor HDLHT 4.5 to 22 by 50 is arguably your best bet. Vortex does have a Gen 3 that's also going to be Razor Gen 3 4 to 24, I think by 50 coming out fairly soon. But again, until I have a production model here to test, I cannot really say anything authoritative on the subject. From what I've heard, it's a very impressive scope. But yeah, until the production model gets here, there's not much really I can do with that. Okay, let's see. Talk a little bit about the crossover stuff. So precision semi-auto, we've touched earlier on the H6XI Steiner. I have the 2 to 12 by 42 model, and I do like it quite a lot. Again, if you don't want to spend March level money and you need something to work with a thermal clip-on and do very nicely for an accurate AR-15, the H6XI 2 to 12 by 42, from what I've seen so far, is easily going onto my list of recommendations. I don't think I've updated that part yet. But I will. I think it's a very nice design. Again, I usually seem to be able to find this in the 1500-ish range, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. The nice thing about the Steiner H6XI, T6XI, and Burris Xterra Pro, that is that they assembled them in the US here in Colorado. Well, I generally don't get too many hangups about where rifle scope is made. It's kind of nice when one is made in the US, and again, we're living in the environment of ever-changing tariffs. So there is an advantage to something that's assembled in the US, I think, that introduces a certain level of, for lack of a better word, let's call it price stability, if you wish. And maybe a little bit of national pride. So yeah, Leupold Mark 5s, Mark 4s are also made in the US. Oh, speaking of Mark 4, that's like I know I forgot to talk about something. Shit, we may run out of time before we get to the less expensive scopes. I'll touch on it briefly, and if there are questions, I can do that in the next live stream. So Leupold Mark 4 HD. So of the scopes that Leupold currently makes as a product line, I think I like Mark 4 HD the most. I have two of them. I have the 2.5 to 10 by 42 and 4.5 to 18 by 52. That the pronghorn that's going to be mounted in the picture you saw earlier, that was shot with a rifle scope with a gun that was wearing a 4.5 to 18 by 52 Leupold Mark 4 HD. So I am kind of unabashedly fan of that design. And the illuminated versions are not ridiculously expensive, which is nice. And the way with Leupold, the way it came together, I think this is the most competitive product line. And partially because the competition in this price range is there's still very strong competition. It's just not as much. It's not as densely populated of a price segment. Somewhat weirdly, in a $2,000 to $5,000 to $3,000 range, there's like a lot and very strong competition. In the $1,500 range, there is competition. It's not as much. So I think Leupold Mark IV HD scopes are very well positioned there. I have seen the higher power versions. I have not tested them. If I was looking for a lightweight scope for like a narrow hunter rifle, 4.5 to 18 or 6 to 24 might be close to the top of my list. But again, there is the usual business. I like the PR2 reticle, and I can't get it eliminated in either one. So go figure. My 4.5 to 18 has the PR1 mil reticle illuminated. As a crossover design, I can do some competition with it, and I can also hunt with it. I think it does very well, and it is for the type, it is a relatively thick reticle. So Mr. Nigel has actually an interesting question here. I'm probably gonna punt on the answer. With unlimited funds, what would you build and bring to the market? That is a good question. The market is very saturated right now, and there are relatively few things that are missing, right? So in terms of the overall optomechanical performance, we're not going to get much better, right? We might get wide angle eyepieces because of some the patent expiration business and all that. But there isn't really. It's not like I can look at the let's say precision rifle scope market and say, okay, nothing here does it for me. I see a way to do it a lot better. I don't see. I think we are. All these designs are really, really well optimized. I wish I had some other reticles. Yes. The interesting things that are still relatively open are, which actually reminded me a couple of scopes that were asked about that I did not cover. I'll get to that momentarily. The primary arms and the MX8. Where things are interesting is electro-optic integration, things like Burris XTRPS, Eliminator 6, and stuff like that. Steiner IFS, the Ravix Smart Scope, PMR, and all that sort of stuff. And on the other end of things, on a very compact end of things, I think there are some possibilities there that would be interesting. I would have loved to have something like the 7-35 tangent with a touch more field of view, with a heads-up display inside, and talking to a weapon-mounted laser rangefinder as an overall optical electro-optical system. I think that would absolutely kick ass. I'd love to have some sort of an adaptive reticle like we have with that Element Hyper 7, and we'll need to talk to them about that separately. But or like Vortex has in the XM57, but that's military only for now. So something like that in a more precision reticle would be very cool. And the technology is there. Eventually, it's going to happen. And on the other side of things, what I would have really liked to see is an exploration of how short we can make a variable scope, like a low power variable with only 4-timer reactor. How short can we make a 1-4? Can we make a true front focal plane 1-4 with a seriously bright reticle the size of a prismatic? Based on what I've seen out there, I think it's viable. And with low power variables, there's certain miniaturization like the Vortex's AMG 1-10 that's kind of available, not really. That's tiny. There's a much shorter that's tiny. Like I said, I didn't get to that class of scopes, and it's going to be scopes for semi-autos. Really, is going to be a different topic for perhaps the next live stream. But there is some optimization there. As far as the general overall optomechanical design for precision scopes, we're pretty close to a pinnacle, I think. At least I'm not seeing the battery manufacturers leaving much of anything at the table. We're just kind of arguing about relatively minor differences. There's still differences, they're still there, but they are relatively minor. Okay, so we're at 1 hour and 46 minutes. I like to keep these things under 2 hours because I'm casting simultaneously to YouTube, Rumble, X, and my locals website, and locals limits my live streams to 2 hours. So by 2 hour mark, I want to wrap up. So I'm going to look through the chat and see what specific questions I missed and address them relatively quickly. And I think it's going to be another live stream to go over the lower priced options in some more detail. So for now, I'm just going to kind of look through and see if there's something specific that was asked and I promised to get to, and I just didn't. Okay, so from Mr. Porsche Spitzer, he's still here. So I've talked about Element. I don't have any real insight into Vector. I've seen them at SHOT Show. I've never tested one. I tried to talk to them a little bit. They look like decent Chinese scopes, but communication was very difficult, and it just wasn't worth my effort. With DNT, so I've talked to them a little bit. I'm generally bullish on DNT. They seem to be wanting to do the right thing. I have 7-35 by 56 front focal plane scope from them, the one they call the one. And it is a nice scope. And for the money, for under $1,000, it might very well be the best precision rifle scope out there. So on DNT, I'm relatively bullish. On Arken, I am relatively bearish for now. So DNT and Arken, DNT sort of like the company behind DNT is the OEM for Arken. It sounds like they had some sort of a falling out. The details are not critical. I know one side of the story, I don't know the other. So I don't know for sure what's happening there. But I've seen enough failures and inconsistencies with Arken scopes that I have for pretty much adopted this whole wait and see approach. I kind of want to wait and see what's happening. If they unless they mend offenses with their current OEM, there might be some issues there. Discovery, I haven't done a thorough test in a while. I've looked at some designs 3-4 years ago. I was not super impressed at the last SHOT Show. Some of the new stuff they saw, the eyepiece was clearly getting better. I think they're still a little bit crude, but also not very expensive. So discovery is clearly improving, getting better. So how much better it's going to get remains to be seen. They're not yet at that performance level where I'm willing to spend a lot of time on them. And I know a couple of guys at Discovery, they're good people. They're trying to do good work. But I'm kind of tracking them, but I'm not going to spend, like, as I explained in the beginning, the market is now enormous. I can only look at so many things, so I have to pre-screen. So as a result of my pre-screen, I'm not going to spend any more time on ARC, and that's not too much variation. I'm not going to spend any time really on Discovery for now. I'm bullish on DNT. I think the product is more mature. That was one of my revelations from SHOT Show earlier this year, how mature the eyepieces are. So that made me want to look at them a little bit more carefully. All right, let's see what else I missed. Rick Hamby said purchase both 5 to 25 and 7 to 35 for 2 PRS rifles, but numbers are hard to see. Okay, yeah, I have both of those with Gen 3 XR. I don't have any issues seeing the numbers, but that all might change as I get older. I think you're a few years older than I am. Okay, so this is enjoy a period. So I've talked about H6XI, Leupold Mark 4 HD with NX8. So I'm just kind of on the record. I don't like NX8 scopes very much. 40-32 is not bad. 2.5 to 20 started. It was really badly. The newer ones are better. I'm still not super impressed. I think like there are some distortion issues, stuff like that. And I don't like the 1 to 8. 40-32 is a decent scope. It's kind of a Me Too scope for Nightforce, and I will sort of go on the record with Nightforce. I like the attackers. I'm not super hot on everything else Nightforce makes. The attacker is a nice product line. The PLXC, the 2.5 to 20 by 48, I've only seen the prototype. I have not seen a full production model. I will explore that when production model gets here. It looked like a nice design, but again, until I see a production scope, it's very hard for me to make any real conclusion. It looked promising, and the non-tree reticle was quite good. The tree reticle, I think, has issues. I think the ACSS reticle family, for me at least, works very well, or fairly well at low power scopes, and I think I'm not a fan of their designs in high power scopes. But this new non-tree reticle that they had was very viable, I thought. Let's see what else I missed. I'm just scanning through the chat box to see if there's something specific I missed. Because we've got 7 minutes before we wrap up. Yeah, I think I've covered everything. Mr. D is asking us what is his choice. I'm not sure which choice you're really referring to. The choice varies depending on the price range and application. As I've said in the beginning, when I'm not testing anything for precision stuff, I usually shoot with tangent scopes. Like my Centrify precision guns have tangents on them. My Rimfire trainer that was arguably shoot more than anything else has a Razor Gen 3 because of how forgiving the eyepiece is, the Gen 3 636. On high magnification, it is the most forgiving eyepiece in iBox, I believe, on the market today. On my precision air gun, I have a March 5 to 42, which I really like. And that's kind of where it comes together for me, but a lot of it is really personal preference. For accurate semi-autos, I really like the 3 to 18, 3 to 20 type scopes. I like the Delta Striker 3.5 to 21 by 44. I like the Steiner T6XI 3 to 18 by 56. Steiner H6XI 2 to 12 by 42. And things like that. I like Telson 3 to 18 by 50. All these kind of $1,500-ish scopes. I think there you really get the most performance for your money. They're not as good as the alpha stuff, but they're very good, and they offer a lot for your hard-earned dollar. The low power variables and stuff, I think that's gonna have to be a separate discussion. There's some really truly excellent high-end stuff out there. And there's some new stuff coming that is just popping up that's worth discussing. The three low power variables, I guess, that I've been using the most are probably Vortex Racer Gen 3 1 to 10 by 24. I think it's an excellent design that is really standing the test of time. For something that is a little bit more of a DMR-oriented low-power variable scope, Delta makes a 1 to 10 by 28 striker with side focus, and if you are trying to extend the distance or do precision at short range, I think that scope has an edge over a lot of the competition. March 1 to 10 short is excellent, but it so happens for the way I shoot the March 1.5 to 15 by 42 kind of fits my general purposes a little bit better. And with second focal plane low power variables, I've been really very happy with the primary arms BLXC 1 to 8 by 24. With the front focal plane version, there's a new one, just hit the streets with a bright reticle. The second focal plane design with fiber illuminated reticle is really excellent and very light. So with low power variables, that's kind of where I end up. But again, we'll have a more detailed discussion of that as we go along. Okay, I hope I captured all the questions you guys had. If there anything else comes up, please put it in the comment under the video. If you do so on YouTube or Rumble or whatever, or X, I'll get to it as soon as I can. I make no promises. If you are trying to get my attention quickly, I have a darkworldofoptics.com website. It's hosted by locals. Most of the information, if you just want to read it or watch the video, is freely available. A little bit of this stuff is behind the paywall. If you want to post or ask questions there, you do have to pay. It turned out to be a good way to filter out people whom it's not that important, and that keeps the amount of questions I get to a reasonable level. Most of my time on the web is spent on my website on darkworldofoptics.com. So if you need to get a hold of me quickly, that's your best bet. I do try to answer everything, all questions I get via all other means, but with the rest of them, I get to them when I get to them. My locals website is where I spend most of my time. Thank you all for sticking with me for this, what is essentially a 2-hour-long monologue. I do appreciate it. And if there's anything I missed, you know where to find me. Thank you all, and good night.